Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca. As Sarah said, I am a clinician with the Take 2 program at Berry Street. I'm also a provisional psychologist at the Berry Street School here in Shepparton, and I'm going to try to assist you all as employees to have a bit more of an understanding about what trauma is, how it comes about, and I'll offer a little bit of advice about some supports we can put in place in the workplace, and then these can be further expanded on with our team on the panel later this morning. So I'll start by doing a bit of a definition of what trauma actually is. So as Sarah explained, trauma's become a little bit of a buzzword, and I imagine a lot of people don't quite understand what trauma looks like. So if we look at it in an ideal world, most of our children will grow up in safe and secure environments, and they experience really nurturing relationships with their primary caregivers, and they have all their emotional, psychological and physical needs met. This really sets them up in a good space so that they are able to go off to school and work in the future and really function to the best of their abilities. But unfortunately we know that there are a lot of children who grow up and they experience some trauma in their lives, and this impacts on their ability to function. So we at Berry Street define trauma as an overwhelming experience that undermines a person's belief that the world is a good and safe place. So this phrase that we use, overwhelming experience, it's profoundly broad and encompassing. This is because we know that trauma can be on a bit of a spectrum, and there are a range of experience that can impact on our behaviours and also those behaviours that we see in children and young people. So traumatic experiences can range from surviving a significant accident or a dangerous event. So that might be, if you were to experience something like a car accident, that would be classed as a traumatic event. Or it can be as long-term as experiencing community poverty and instability, or suffering ongoing abuse, violence and neglect. So there are three main types of trauma I wanted to define for you all today. To start off with, we have simple trauma, and that's experiencing an incredibly stressful one-time event. So that can come back to something like your horrible car accident if you happen to be mugged or something, God forbid. Second, we have complex trauma. So this is when someone experiences multiple ongoing incidents of trauma. It typically involves threats to personal safety and violence and violation of human rights. So someone who experiences complex trauma is often associated with intense feelings of shame and disconnection. And these can be events such as long-term family violence, surviving abuse, experiencing physical or emotional neglect throughout your life. And then we come to developmental trauma, and this is the one that Berry Street does see most within our work environment. Developmental trauma is the impact of significant adversity, so that's hardship and distress throughout your life. And this happens in the early life and can affect a child's emotional, social, physical and neurological development. These are things such as abuse, neglect in early life. It can be neglect in utero, infancy and childhood. So as a result of this exposure to early stress and trauma, children can develop a range of unhealthy coping strategies, and they have a limited capacity to manage their emotions and their impulses. So now that I've been able to explain a bit about what trauma is, how exactly does this relate to the behaviours that we might see in young people who have experienced trauma? So, next page please. So trauma actually impacts on our neural connections in the brain, and it really changes how we function as humans. So I want to run you through a little bit of a crash course. I'm going to try not to be overly analytic and we'll try to make sure that we can all have a good understanding of exactly how these behaviours come about. I've just realised how difficult this is going to be with the microphone. So if we look at the basic structure of a brain, I've broken it down to three main areas for us to all understand. So we've got the brainstem, the limbic system and the cortex. And I think a good way to understand this is to remember that we all have a little brain model within our hand. So if we start with the brainstem, this could be kind of from the wrist up. So the brainstem is the part of our brain, obviously, that connects the brain to the spinal cord. And it controls all those automatic functions, so our breathing, blood pressure, heart rate, which for someone like me is quite high right now. And then on the top of the brainstem, sitting right on top of it, is what's called our limbic system. Within our limbic system, we have this delightful little thing called an amygdala, which can also be called the watchdog of the brain. So it's essentially assessing everything out in our environment to see if something is a threat. So if we were to think back in our evolutionary times, cavemen, they'd be looking around, there's a saber-toothed tiger, your little watchdog's going to go off and go, mate, you need to run or haul us out of there because you're going to die. So then that's what that's going to do. And then, what comes over the top of that is what's called our cortex. Now this is where all the thinking, that higher level function is going to happen. So we've got lots of rational and reasoning there. It's made up of lobes as well, which you might have heard throughout your schooling years. You've got your frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. And then the most important part within our cortical brain is what's called the prefrontal cortex, and that sits behind your forehead, and this is really responsible for logic and reasoning. So now that we've got our little hand model, we just have to remember that within our hand, right in the centre of our brain, we've got that watchdog that's constantly scanning. And what happens if it perceives a threat? So if you were out walking, you see a snake or a stick that looks like a snake, it's going to react. Your brain doesn't want you to see a threat, allow yourself a few seconds to process it while the snake bites you and then think, oh, I should have run. So it's going to instantly flip its lid. Your rational reasoning thinking brain is going to go offline and you're going to react in a way that is going to save you. So this is something that's called the stress response, and it's something that you might have heard referred to as the fight, flight, freeze, and also fawn is another common reaction. So now we know about the stress response, and it kicks in, and that's the survival brain. But what exactly are these fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses that we might see in our young people, or even in ourselves? So when our survival brain kicks in, we can go into what's called hyperarousal, and that's when our body responds defensively. So this is when we might fight or flight. So if you're in the workplace, you might see someone react with a little bit of aggression, or they might flip their lid essentially and they'll become very defensive or blow up. So this is a fight response because they're perceiving a threat. Another response might be running away or just not showing up. And this is another survival response that we know as flight. Our other option is to go into what's called hypoarousal. And this is when our body shuts down or we freeze. So if we were to freeze, you might see that somebody is zoning out a little bit, staring off in their own little world, or they might completely disengage, or the best term is shutting down, and that's a freeze response. And then we have this fourth option, which is really specific to someone who has experienced childhood trauma, and this is fawn. So it's a specific type of instinctive response resulting from childhood abuse and complex trauma. It results in a person's survival response to avoid conflict, to appeasing people before they can cause any harm to them. So this is one that we feel is quite important to keep mindful of any young people that have experienced trauma, because they might be looking for that excessive people pleasing because they may perceive you as a threat, as somebody as authority. So why do people experience these kinds of extreme responses more often than others? So one idea which provides us with a great model is what's called the window of tolerance. So this window of tolerance describes the optimum zone of arousal in which people are able to manage the ebbs and flows of daily emotions. So when we are within this window, we can process emotions in a healthy way and access our thinking brain. So we can respond more rationally to stress and anxiety that might come at us throughout the day. So we all have a window of tolerance. It just depends on how wide or narrow our window is. And that window can change throughout our lifetime. It can change weekly, monthly, depending on what you're going through. So people who have experienced complex and developmental trauma can have quite a narrow window. So likewise, someone who has experienced a one-off event, so if you have just gone through something horrific, you might find that your tolerance window has become quite small and you're flying into those hyperarousal or hypoarousal states more commonly. And we all need people to help rebuild us, to help rebuild our confidence so that we're then able to expand our windows again. So I think the window of tolerance is a great visual to show how we can all fluctuate between hyper and hypoarousal. So I think right now I can imagine most of you are feeling quite relaxed, calm, you're alert, and you're present in the moment. This is what it feels like when you're in your optimum window of tolerance. So if something slightly irritating was to happen right now, I imagine most of you would be able to brush it off. For somebody who was outside their window of tolerance or starting to feel the dysregulation, which is where those lines are that cut off the window of tolerance, if something irritating was to happen, it might be that final straw in the camel's back that just makes you flip. So most days I think that all of us can get through without triggering our stress response. But like anyone, we are all humans. So there are days where if we were to look at this, we might wake up one morning, we'll be within our window of tolerance, things are going well. But then something happens. Kids are running late for school, you're running late for work, you're getting phone calls from the boss, you start to heighten. You can see the line going up. Then you've got regulation, which is kind of code for some coping strategies. You might call your partner or your boss, calm them down, everything's fine, you can come up to work late, the meeting can be delayed, whatever's happening. So you come back down again. But then you get to work and you find out that all your employees have COVID. You can't get your work done. So you're starting to escalate again. A coping strategy tries to come in, you're like, I'm just going to breathe, catch my breath, but then you realise catching my breath's not going to help me because I have no employees. So you completely flip out and go into hyperarousal. So you've flipped your lid, and this is something that happens to all of us. You've either run away from work, you've pushed your desk over. I don't recommend any of those, but all that happens, you're all heightened. But then the next thing that happens is that you might realise, I've just flipped my lid, this hasn't helped anything, we've made no profits for the day, and then you can see that we can drop straight down into hypoarousal. So it doesn't mean that we're only going to experience one of the stress responses, we can go from one to the other quite quickly. And then I imagine they've gone home, comfort food, so they've had beer, wine, and then they're feeling much better. I'd like to end on some basic strategies which may be able to help build confidence and support to the young people who enter the workforce. And we can help increase their window of tolerance to stop them going into these stress response situations. Go to my last slide. So to start off with, I would like to touch on the importance of positive relationships. So lots of research and everything we do within our clinician role really focuses on the importance of relational health and how that can help heal trauma or just support that person through life. So we strongly encourage that you get to know a young person more closely. Just like taking on a new apprentice or somebody else in the workplace, how would you like to be greeted if you came in? Get to know them, build that trust between yourself and them, understand who they are as a person. It could be a good strategy to introduce a mentor to this young person, someone who's consistent, safe and reliable. Give them that one person who they can go to whenever they need some help, and help them instill hope in their relationships with adults and all relationships again. And then this person can also help them increase that window of tolerance, and then gradually we would hope this young person would feel confident to branch out and build relationships with other people in the workplace. You can also develop code words for when a young person might be starting to feel escalated, when they feel they're starting to leave their window of tolerance. Have a little bit of a code word and make it a kind of an agreed fact that, okay, 5 minutes, head outside, go for a walk. We don't want it to be something too detrimental. So head out, go for a walk, have a chat with your mentor, listen to some music, whatever helps them regulate. Explore with them what their strengths are and work to build on what they're good at. So help instilling that confidence in them so that they do keep coming back to work. Communication, ensuring you have open communication. Be flexible with how you communicate with them. I think for a lot of us millennials, a phone call can be quite daunting, and that could be the thing that sets them off or just cause them to go into the flight mode and they don't want to come in. So being a bit more flexible, sending a text message to check in, you might get much more response out of them. Predictability. So unpredictability for a lot of us can equal risk. So even if you think about yourself going into a new workplace, how stressful that can be because you don't know what you're expecting. Maybe meet with them beforehand or provide some shadow shifts where they know someone's going to meet with them, show them around, just so that they know what they're doing when they walk in. Safe and supportive. So just reinforce it's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes help us all learn, and start with small achievable tasks. Again, building up that confidence, that predictability, that they know they're going to come into work, they're going to achieve something. And rules and expectations. So these help provide guidance. Again, comes back to that predictability, and it helps young people know all their boundaries. So I think that it's important to remember that we all need to build our window of tolerance, and we need to allow others to learn and build their skills and increase their confidence to stay employed. So everyone deserves the right to have a supportive workplace and job that they can learn and thrive in.